Thanks everyone who's so far watching our chat. A little bit later into the talk, we are going to invite people who want to participate up on stage with us to share some of their stories and their work or personal experiences around this. But we'll go ahead and get started here. So today we're going to talk about the empathy challenge, practicing recognizing your blind spots. And so I'm Liz Tupper. I'm the Director of Product Strategy at Software for Good. We're a local development agency here in Minneapolis that does for good software development. But today we're going to start this out a little bit different. We're going to talk a little bit about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So a few weeks ago, or a couple weeks ago, I put out this message on all my social media accounts. So Twitter, Facebook, even LinkedIn. And I asked everyone to send me their best instructions for making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And I got a whole bunch of responses, which was really great. I didn't include all of the responses, but I was like, oh, well, this should be easy, right? Making peanut butter and jelly. So I got together my supplies. And Colleen, if you could go back to that last one real quick. So I got my plate out, a knife out, the peanut butter we had, the strawberry jam, and then a loaf of bread. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to walk through some of these. So I took an easy one as a starter. So this first person was like, okay, butter knife for peanut butter on right slice, spoon for strawberry preserves on left slice, and then press together directly and enjoy. And I was like, cool, I've got the knife, check. Peanut butter, of course I have that, right? Check. Strawberry preserves, yeah, sure, that'll pass. Check. And then I was like, right and left slice. Well, what if I wanted to lay out the bread like this? And this is the next slide, Colleen. So what if I wanted to lay my bread on top of each other, right? But it pretty much passes.
Yeah.
And so then I'm like, okay, so I've got my plate, my knife, the peanut butter, strawberry preserves, and the right and left slice of bread. And I was like, oh my gosh, I hope they meant bread, right? They just said slice. But of course they meant bread. And then a spoon. So then I had to go get a spoon. So here's what I got. Okay, cool. We're pretty good there. So moving on to the next set of instructions. This is a lot more in-depth. Glass of whole milk. Well, I can't drink milk. Favorite 2 slices of bread, check. Kerrygold Irish butter. So I'm sure some people would actually love this. And I actually had a lot of people recommending butter. So if that's like a thing now. So I can't do it, but so I'll pass on that. And then it was Skippy extra crunchy peanut butter. And I was like, oh, like I don't have that brand on me right now. So I can't make that. And then good strawberry raspberry jam, check. And then they had sharp knife. And I was like, oh my gosh, I probably shouldn't be using a sharp knife, but that works. They wanted to cut it in these nice little squares. It sounds absolutely delicious. But so let's look at the next one. And then this person was like, try almond butter instead. And I'm like, yeah, that's totally right, because not everyone can eat peanuts. And I was like, well, I can't eat the dairy on that last list of instructions. And I probably shouldn't be using a sharp knife like I talked about. And I didn't have the right supplies because of the Skippy and the butter and everything. And then I'm like, well, it's not worth going to the store just to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Plus, let's be real, I haven't been to the grocery store since March. My husband does that. And then not to mention, like, I have gluten allergies and I couldn't eat the bread that I picked for this anyways. And then I'm like, well, like, and you probably all are thinking this, like, why are you making a sandwich? And what does this have to do with empathy and bias? And so let's say instead of talking about sandwiches, because it's close to lunch, and I'm sure you all are getting hungry, just like talking about eating food like I am. And what if we talk about, instead of making a peanut butter sandwich, we talk about making technology. And so how do we make sure that we're removing our biases while designing, building, and testing, and putting empathy first and technology second? And the one interesting thing about the original tweet that I put out there is I specifically said instructions. Now, I did ask people to give me their best instructions, but instructions are different than a recipe versus, just like your personal preference. Now, everyone went to, and understandable, they also didn't know they were part of my talk, helping me curate some content for my talk. But most people, when they're building products, they base it based on either what they want or what they already know. So I wanted to have a conversation about biases. And so I invited Ari to join so we could have a conversation about biases. So I'm going to let her introduce herself as well. And then as we get a little way into this talk, we want other people to come up too and talk about what they've sort of observed, what they're doing in their own work, and their sort of personal reflections as well.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Liz, for inviting me to speak in this session. I'm really excited to chat with you and to chat with the audience as well. Again, my name is Ariel Daya. I am a local entrepreneur here in Minneapolis. I actually run a digital marketing agency called Collectively Digital. And we do a lot around creative strategy, content marketing, and web development. Last fall, I did launch a tech startup called SID Technologies, and that stands for Social Impact Identification. And the purpose of SID is first of all, it is a AI SaaS solution, and it's the mission of the software is to mitigate biases within systems and institutions. Since marketing is my entire experience as far as my agency, from a marketing perspective, what I've seen in my past and in my experience is quite a bit of biases and stereotypes that we all have that seep into our work. And with the current climate of racial unrest, there are many over the years, really for the last decade since Michael Brown, that I personally have actually taken notice. I mean, we remember Rodney King, but I was a child at that time, and it's still very powerful. But Michael Brown is our Rodney King. It is our Rodney King, and that just really disturbed me, and I started to really notice certain things and messaging from media and magazines and social media. You can see some of those photos. Some are implicit and some are very, very blatant. So, I mean, I started to think, like, what is the corporate responsibility? What is our responsibility? What impact does, I mean, we always talk about how words matter and they're powerful. And I noticed that the words that are being used in marketing in my field are very, it's sales, it's suggestive. But when the messaging itself goes beyond selling, if you look at some of these campaigns here, most probably you've heard about the Heineken, lighter is better. And anyone that's seen that commercial, you would think that the team would have noticed and someone would have spoken up about how offensive this campaign may be to Black women specifically. And of course, Gucci rang in the new year in 2019 with this blackface turtleneck, which got so much backlash. You would think that someone at the design table would have said, hey, this might actually be offensive. And, having worked at large organizations in marketing, I know that before we push anything out, legal, it has to pass legal. So the fact that legal did not kill this is beyond me. and the cost to take that product to market. I mean, it's a $998 turtleneck, I think. Moving on to Dove, I think one of equally as offensive and perpetuates a Jim Crow era advertisement where you see a woman of color, it's their beauty campaign, right? A woman of color is taking a skin tone shirt off to show her beauty, and she turns into expressive beauty, and she turns into a white woman. And then the spectrum of clean. Yeah, that one needs a deep dive, and we can go through that later. And of course, here's another campaign here by Zuma Jews that that offended an entire community of the disabled community. So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into messaging and what we encourage and the biases and stereotypes that are out there. And I think there's a social responsibility that should be applied to our industry when we communicate. And that is what SID solution is all about. SID mitigates and helps teams uncover their unconscious bias, de-bias their decisions. SID also helps teams have very difficult conversations. I was in the community and cultural session yesterday, and I mentioned, I mean, Liz, you and I, we have like very candid conversations about race and sexism and all of that. And I think that we don't have enough of those conversations. There's so much unknown that we tend to, in the process of being sensitive or politically correct, we ignore the realities
right.
and facts. You know what I mean? Like, I want to know what white people talk about behind closed doors. I know what as a Black woman, as an African, what my family, my friends, and I talk about, and how we address race and what we think and how we feel. But I don't necessarily know the other side.
Yeah.
Like when do those conversations even happen? So, I mean, that could just be being a curious mind, but
yeah, there's this sense of and I felt it myself, right? Like awkwardness, people not knowing how to approach conversations. And then and we were talking about this earlier, like this risk of offending people. It's real, right?
Yeah.
And I think your intention is not to be, frankly, an asshole, right? Like we all, in order for us to learn, and we talk about this as entrepreneurs, let's fail fast. So why can't we fail fast with making mistakes around some of the language that we're using?
Let's fail fast as humans, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Let's fail and let's learn and let's correct ourselves. And the key is correction.
Totally.
Let's correct ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And we don't, at Software for Good, we're trying to build more products with inclusivity in mind, but we're not claiming to be the experts. There's things we've learned over time that we know are the right things to do, but we're continuing to learn and explore and invite other partners to the table to help bring different perspectives to things. But some of the more common examples is if people want to do a survey or have a form on their websites. So first of all, don't ever other a group of people, don't have the other option, have it be custom or name it something else. Cause I don't want to ever be in a position where people are getting othered because we don't have a category selection. And even a step before that, ask yourselves, do we even need to ask questions about gender or race or ethnicity in the first place? Why do we feel like we need to collect or ask that information? Yeah. Step 2 would be, if you do need to ask that information, make sure that the options are representative of the people. So you're not just picking your standard list of things. So talk and consult with other people. And then if you do want to have some sort of catch-all, just please don't use the word other, because it's horrible. And then like another just sort of real easy thing that we talk to people about is list full name instead of first name and last name, because a lot of people don't follow the standard Western European one first name, one last name naming convention. And then like if you're filling something out, whether it's a form on a site or a survey, name is usually the first question. And so you're already discriminating someone or leaving them out or making them feel excluded if that first set of fields doesn't actually match them as an individual. And so these are just some small examples, and these are things that we've been instituting, but there's way more to this than just these things.
Yeah. I think it's really, you're learning about people. Education is really at the core of change, right? You can't change what you don't know is wrong, or you can't, you know what I mean? So one of the things that SIT does, we compare it to the Grammarly of bias, think of it in that way. And it's educating users, not only uncovering their unconscious bias, but also educating them around the history behind words, right? Because there's a lot of history behind the words in the English language and how they came about that that other groups may, that may actually offend other groups, and it means something else to them. And just having that awareness, again, it starts with awareness. You need to be aware of these things in order to correct them. So SIT does give that background on not only this item is that this term and this language is at risk of bias, but this is why. Right. This is why. If you don't know the why, it doesn't really make sense, because think of it, when someone said, "Oh, don't do that," but why? Why am I doing that? So you need to have that background, that education is very important to changing mindsets and to taking action.
Right. No, totally. And there's like, I think the last 6 months have proven this. There's great power in developing technology. So if you're a technologist, or even if you work in marketing, or if you work in product development, so it doesn't just extend to technology, but I'm obviously speaking from tech because that's where I work. We're designing the things that people use.
Yeah.
And now since COVID, right, we're seeing economies completely shift online with distance learning. And I watched all these people hop on Zoom and Google Meet that have never used that before, right? Yeah. And some of that will go back maybe at some point in time, but I would imagine that some people are going to just adopt that new way of being. And so because we're creating and designing the world, we have a responsibility and a power to make sure that the tools that we are making are serving all people, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, which language they speak, if they have a disability, their age, right? Like all of these things need to be factored in from day one, because if they're not, then you've just limited access for someone, or you didn't maybe limit access, but you definitely made that person feel excluded in some sort of way. And so I think it's really important that whatever we're doing in our work, we're learning, right? Whether it's like going out and seeking information through building relationships with people, right? hiring, like if your staff doesn't have a representative sample of the world, and the customers that you're serving, hire either people on your immediate team and pay people well for the work, like equal pay for the work, or hire consultants, right? And then if you can't do that, right, you need to go talk to your users, and you need to listen to podcasts and watch documentaries and articles and show up in communities, and you need to be okay to have those awkward conversations and fail fast as humans, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we need to be vulnerable enough to allow ourselves to fail. I think we're a society of type A's, of people just don't, a fear of failure. It's win. You have to fail to learn, because in failing you learn. I I learned that during my time in LA. as in my 20s, I failed a lot, and I learned a lot. So it was very hard. It's hard to fail. That feeling that you get when you fail, it's just not it's not good. It's not exciting. So we try to avoid that feeling of failure, and in the process we're not learning. And that's what we're not aware, that we're not learning, we're not growing, by not failing.
Yeah, it's failure sucks, and especially in the moment when you either know it's coming or it just happened, it feels so shitty. It's awful. But and I could write a memoir on all my professional and personal life failures. And in fact, even my first public speaking thing, I totally bombed. I think I talked about this. Someone wrote a blog post about how bad my talk was. But it was and I knew, I could tell it was not going well, but it was a real wake up call for me. And I'm still talking, and I feel like I do a pretty damn good job with public speaking. And so you can't, you gotta, the best thing to do if you're afraid of failure is to look at your previous failures and be like, oh no, I'm still here. We're good. I'm still here. I'm still living.
Exactly.
I'd love, if people, I know we've got some people watching along, if other people, Ari and I can talk all day. Obviously we'll only talk to tell our time, but if other people want to join in, I'd love to hear other people's perspective up on stage.
How are you guys thinking about bias, and what are you guys doing in your work or in your personal life to address that? Or do you, has this year been an eye opener to biases and to issues around them?
Yeah, as we wait for people to join, I'll share a couple of personal anecdotes on so I'm in my second marriage, and there was essentially 10 years between my two marriages. And I always had to, I hated when I had to fill out forms saying I was divorced, because I don't feel like divorce should be an identity for me. And so I'm always like, why do they need to ask this information? I can understand if I was applying for a mortgage and they needed to double check previous records and make sure everything was sound there. But there are so many forms that I had to fill out that asked me my relationship status. And I was like, what are you doing? Why do you feel the need to ask that?
Right. I feel the same way about filling out single. In my 30s now, it's okay, single. Yeah.
Right? I don't need this reminder.
I don't need, exactly. It's okay, you really need this information. What do you
Right.
Well,
and divorce isn't a happy experience. And also, depending on some people really love being single and some people are bummed out about it. So why are you setting this tone of or widow? No one wants to label that they're widowed on something unless it's actually required. So just thinking through beyond the questions, why are we doing this beyond the words? Like, how would someone take this? Like, how would, like, and being really thoughtful and intentional of, like, instead of just getting it out and making sure it passes like your copy edit and your legal review, like going beyond that and looking at the humanity of what it is.
I think it's important to also step out of your circle in that process, in learning and in failing. Step out of your comfort zone. I mean, when I first moved back to Minneapolis, I went to um, a couple of events in town, and which were incredibly white spaces. And, you know, the looks that I received and the, I two of them, I remember specifically two of them that like literally no one spoke to me, but I kept going back and I would put myself in other spaces until I, you know, started to get used to just being in such a space where it stood out like a sore thumb. But that got, it took getting used to. And in doing that, I was able to learn to not be so uncomfortable, and to really, learn how to network, because if someone's not going to come to me, then I have to go to them, right? And then put myself in that awkward space of having to introduce myself and start a conversation, knowing full well that I'm an other space. So yeah, you have to get out of your comfort zone. You have to, in order to change your mindset, in order to see things for what they are too, you have to be uncomfortable.
Totally. Well, and it's also okay to show up in a space and just sit down and listen for a while before you introduce, right? Like, that's totally cool. Like and I like toe the line between extrovert and introvert. And there's sometimes I go to events and I'm like, whoa, I don't know where my place is here yet. So I'm just going to sit and observe and listen. And then when I see where there's an opportunity for me to either ask questions or share knowledge, right, then like there's my opportunity to talk to someone. And it might be pulling someone aside one-on-one. And that's totally okay too. Like it's okay to just show up and listen. And I think it's going to be really rare, at least here in the Twin Cities, that you show up to something and someone's like, why are you just sitting there listening?
I feel like people, and I don't know if this is something that comes from, going in school where you have to raise your hand and, or maybe not have to, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or, in school, as in college, and when you do internship, it's like, to be recognized, you have to have a lot of questions, and so that people can, notice you and recognize you. That's what you're taught, but no one teaches you to really just be silent and listen and assess and, and really listen. I think that's probably, that's something that as children, as we grow as adults, we need to learn how to listen more.
Yes. I definitely could use more of that for myself too, right? Because I'm a talker, right? Like, shh, Liz, just stop.
Yeah. What else have you done what else are you doing in your personal life, or with Software for Good, with your team, to help organizations recognize even their internal team biases?
Yeah. So when we start a relationship with another organization, we walk into it as a partnership, and we're really clear on the get-go. And it's nice because we can reflect back on the fact that we're Software for Good and we're an impact organization. So every decision that we're going to make is all going to be around like, what's the best thing to create the biggest impact within the like framework that we've set up for the project. But we walk into that and we just tell people out of the gate, like, we're here partners. So that also means like, we're going to challenge you and we're going to challenge your team on doing this. And so a couple of things more recently that we just launched the Minnesota COVID-19 housing assistance program with the state. And that's for like, if you need rent or mortgage relief or utility bills relief, you can call 211 and they'll walk you through the application, or you can fill out the application at mnhousing.org. But that actually came out of work that we had started 3.5 years ago with a partner called Housing Link. They're a local nonprofit and they work in the affordable housing space. And we had done, the project was supposed to go live in August. Like after years of being built, it was actually going to go live. And then we're like, oh, we're going to repurpose some of the work that we did for this other thing now. But it was all about building the waitlist process for project-based Section 8 housing. And so for that work, we actually went out and we talked to community organizations, case managers, people who were trying to get on wait lists, right? So we went to a couple of shelters and talked to people. And so that was like super eye-opening. And so we always try to be really intentional with writing out sort of a script, initial script of how we meet with people, and then reviewing that with our client. And then even like reviewing that like broader to be like, hey, like, are we making sure our biases are in check here? Like, we don't want to offend anyone, but we want to open up the dialogue. And so we use that as a guide, but we're not super formulaic about it. So I'm a big fan of like, we're humans, we're building relationships. If we show up to these conversations, we talk about like, we let them be human, right? And so we start with like just some quick intros, but I'm a big believer of like, you let the river flow the way the river needs to flow.
Right.
And so like when going out, so you need to be trusted and invited into certain communities. And we had those trusted contacts and those invitations. And then you need to just listen, right? Like go back to the listening. So back to the housing app that we just launched in August. So it's from the state, right? And it's big government and they have all of these requirements and they wanted to use names split out. And we're like, yeah, nope. Like we're not gonna allow that in the tool. And so just like having conversations and also knowing like, we wanted to have really great language, knowing that like no dead ends, right? So like, even if you didn't qualify for whatever reason, so there's a pre-application, and then if you pass that, you get into the application. There's no dead ends, right? You get directed to go to United Way's 211 page, so they can talk about other services and options that are available. So like we're talking about people in crisis, so making sure that there's no dead ends. You know, we went through a few times saying, yeah, this is a form that the state provided us, you need to fill, but like, yeah, this like no one's going to know what this means. Oh, and by the way, this is probably not going to translate well into another language because of the wording that's used. And that's another thing that we've been talking about is like making sure that, you know, if you're serving a wider audience, that you have both language translation, but you're also doing a cultural translation, because one-to-one language doesn't always make sense in all contexts, especially if we're talking about critical things where there might be different sort of decision-making or perceptions on that type of thing. And so like reaching out to those communities to also make sure to like rewrite that software a little bit in some of the language that's more appropriate to that culture that you're trying to service.
Right. And that really, that's something that we struggled with in the marketing industry too, is just, you know, data doesn't translate culture. So, I mean, in the teams that I've worked in my professional career, it's always about the data, and data is great, and we need data. I mean, Sid uses quite a bit of data, but Sid does not translate culture. So that those are their cultural nuances. That's what makes us human, right? It's all about culture, and there's so many teams out there that are trying to they're guessing games, on what this audience prefers based on the data and all of that, and that's not necessarily the case. So it does, with our agency, with Collectively Digital, we tend to work with creatives that identify as our clients' target audience, and they inform strategy. So I think that's really important, to pull someone from that community to inform, because you can't just, you shouldn't make assumptions. And that's where those biases really, I see those biases really take play.
Yeah, for sure. Sort of another thing. So like I talked about like forms and surveys at the beginning of the when we sat down and started talking. I'm standing, I'm not sitting, but that's funny. But surveys aren't always great. So we always, if we're going to do a survey, we want to be really intentional about what's the representative sample, because let's be real, white middle class people fill out surveys and very few people from other demographics fill out surveys. So like, then you're going to be making skewed decisions based on the people who have time or energy to fill that survey out, or who maybe received the survey, right? Like maybe you didn't have a wide enough sampling group. And so the city of St. Paul is one of our clients that we've been working with for a couple of years. And this was pre-COVID. I think it was either end of last year or early this year. We did a survey with them, and it was like 96% of the survey respondents were white Caucasian. And we're like, well, that's obviously not a representative sample of people who live and work in St. Paul. And so what we did is we had individuals from their team who were people of color go out and actually meet people on the street and show up at different community events. And so we wanted to make sure that like it wasn't any of the like white members from our team trying to go out there. We wanted to have people who had already built relationships to go and get feedback. And we got a great response. Like we had a whole bunch more data that sort of validated some assumptions and then like devalidated some of our other assumptions. And that was great. That's what we wanted to do. So I would say that too. Like if you're going to do a survey, electronic survey, and you want to have a wider demographic, try to figure out a way how you can show up in those other spaces.
Yeah.
It might actually mean physically sending people, or having a partner organization that you work with to get those types of responses.
Right. And I think it's really it's a great strategy too in building trust. That shows that you understand that there is a difference, and in understanding that difference, you're respecting it by working and partnering with community partners or employees who identify, consultants who identify as that target audience, because then they can speak to it.
Yep. This has been great. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I love talking about this.
No one wants to be brave enough to jump on here. I know this is a very awkward conversation, and there's a lot of fears around, saying the wrong thing and coming off as something, or admitting to, a bias. So I think I would hope this is a safe space. The key is having a conversation. Again, I can't stress enough how that leads to more awareness. When you have these candid conversations, you learn a lot. You learn a lot about the other person. You learn a lot about yourself. You get to take that with you and let it, marinate in your head. And it's like, okay, I didn't know that. I've had a lot of those moments over the past couple of years here, in Minneapolis, and um, just learning about the community, learning about, cultures here, um, learning about myself, learning about over the past few years, I've learned more I'm an African immigrant, I'm Nigerian. So there's a lot in the past few years that I've actually learned about, Black American history. And I was actually, I'm actually stunned, like most of it or half of it didn't learn in school. So it's like I'm learning more about how narratives, there are narratives where people are completely excluded, or or the narrative isn't true, or isn't a true representative. So in again, education, if you want to debias, and be more inclusive, you have to educate yourself. You can't shy away from um, these topics, even, and some of them may be even painful to dive into for you. There's a lot of guilt and there's a lot of anger. um, Let that sink in. Let that sink in, because yeah, you're human and this is real. Like, you're gonna be angry, you're gonna feel guilty, you're gonna have all those feelings, but the key is to take something away from that, right, and take action.
Yeah.
That's the key. So
On that note, like that first housing project that we worked on, where I mentioned we went and talked to people and we went to some shelters, my coworker at the time and myself went in our cars and cried afterwards after hearing those conversations, because there was just this whole, like, I didn't know a ton, like I knew affordable housing, but I didn't know about the process and I didn't know about all the barriers that people were facing in that. And that was really, like, it was really good that we were there to hear those stories firsthand. And it was just really hard and really eye-opening. So we went and grieved, right? But then we took all that energy and we put it back into the work.
right.
And that's the benefit of doing it, is like being able to take that and then take that energy and put it somewhere else.
I mean, if anything, from a business perspective, it behooves you. It should be part of your sales strategy, your growth plan.
Yep.
Okay. Because being more inclusive only expands your reach. It expands your reach and your growth. And I mean, there's plenty of products out there that have proven that Black Panther, for one. Who would have thought? It's not, I mean, the storyline itself, it's not, groundbreaking, but the fact that it was an all Black cast, and having come from Hollywood, I understand what this means, like, and what's Hollywood, as liberal as it seems, is incredibly racist. And you see that in the narratives of the stories that are being told. And for not just Black Americans, but for Black people, Black and brown people around the world, which is why it was such a blockbuster, they're not used to seeing themselves in those empowering characters. They're not used to having stories told that infuses real, African languages, or actual fables. Like, it's like, what? It's usually, the narrative is usually about slavery, like Django. You know, so to see this and to also, and just the revenue that generated, everyone was stunned. What? but it's a, Black films have that reputation of not, at least that's what producers say, a reputation of not performing well and all of that. So it behooves, from a business perspective, I mean, it's just a great strategy, to be quite.
Agreed. I know we're at, you're probably going to say this, we're at time.
Yeah, but we also have a question from an attendee. I wanted to look at that.
Great. Thanks. So Joey, in answer to your question, so how do you make people feel more comfortable in interviews? I don't tell people what my title is when I go and just meet people. So I meet obviously it's now in COVID, so we're doing virtual interviews. But I go meet people where they're most comfortable, whether it's a coffee shop, a community center, like library, like a park. Go to a space where they're going to be most comfortable first, number one. I never tell anyone my title. I just tell them the organization that I'm with and what we're doing. And then I make sure that like that person has been invited by either my client or a community org, so that we've already been like softly introed to them so they know that it's coming. Mm-hmm. And then we talk about it just like, even if we're doing like a prototype review, we just it's also a conversation. So we have a really good sort of get to know you conversation. So for example, we rebuilt Eureka Recycling's website, and we did a survey, and then we went out and talked to people about stuff. And then we did some card sorting with them. And the first thing we asked everyone was like, tell us like the first time you were really into recycling. And it just started this whole sort of thing about like, oh, when I was younger, we collected cans or we collected newspapers. And so that like, just find a good icebreaker based on the scenario. Because I think if you can do a nice little icebreaker and build some trust first before you dive into whatever the thing is, you're going to get a better response from the thing. And I would just leave titles out. Like a lot of people don't even know what UX designer means. Like my parents don't know what that means, right? So like just talk about your org and your relationship with the work and what you're hoping to get out of the discussion, and then just be human and then get to the work. Like have a conversation, small talk, and then get to the goal of it. And then compensate people for your tests. Like figure out a way to give them a gift card, give them money, give them something for them exchanging their time to help you out with your work.
That's a great idea. That's great.
Oh, well, we're at time. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ari, so much. Thanks, Colleen, for running the slides. It was so great. It's a weird startup week this time around, but I love doing this anyways.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more sessions going on. Collectively Digital is supporting Startup Week and the beta team and the marketing. So this has been a great experience for us, as we talked about, earlier, tapping those I identify as a target audience, and beta tapped, my team to support them in reaching a more diverse audience. So I'm glad to see the conversation that was going on the main stage with Mondo and all the other, Elizabeth Adams is on. So there's a lot more, and I think there's a lot of engagement all around. So I'm glad we were able to host Startup Week this year.
Right? That's a big feat in and of itself.
Startup Week, I started my journey in tech, in terms of Sid in 2018 at Startup Week. Like I was, and I mean that I was just so, the information, the insights from all the sessions, I'm like, just like I was so excited for the sessions. I didn't know which one to go to. I was like, which one? And I feel like, having this virtual experience allows people to go back to it, right? You get to go back to this and re-experience it. And I think that the positive that came from COVID is that now we get to have more experience, more diverse experience, and reach a wider audience that may not be comfortable enough, sitting in what had been in all white space for so long. Now they can engage digitally, and I think it's amazing.
Totally agree. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.